Princess Zephyr of the Bolian Empire never imagined she'd fall for a human rebel, let alone one who'd taken her hostage. But as she locked eyes with Charles Morgan, former U.S. Marine and leader of Earth's resistance, she felt a spark that defied the centuries-old conflict between their species. The year was 2185. Earth lay in ruins, its cities reduced to rubble by the technologically superior Bolian forces. Humanity, once proud and independent, now toiled under the yoke of alien oppression. But hope refused to die. In the shadows of crumbling skyscrapers and abandoned streets, Charles Morgan rallied the remnants of human civilization. His charisma and tactical brilliance transformed a ragtag group of survivors into a formidable resistance movement. Their goal? To reclaim their planet and restore human dignity. During a daring raid on a Bolian outpost in the ruins of Washington, D.C., Charles and his team stumbled upon classified information that would change the course of their struggle. Princess Zephyr, heir to the Bolian throne, was due to arrive on Earth for a secret diplomatic mission. Charles saw an opportunity. If they could capture the princess, they might finally have leverage against their alien overlords. With this goal in mind, he devised a plan to infiltrate the heavily guarded Bolian embassy in New Atlanta, the new seat of Earth's government. Using salvaged Bolian technology and human ingenuity, Charles and his team constructed advanced stealth suits. These marvels of engineering would allow them to bypass the embassy's cutting-edge security systems. As night fell over New Atlanta, the resistance fighters donned their suits and moved silently towards their target. The moment they breached the facility's outer defenses, Charles knew something was wrong. The Bolians had anticipated their attack. Laser fire erupted from hidden emplacements, filling the air with deadly beams of light. In the chaos of the ensuing firefight, Charles found himself separated from his team. Heart pounding, he navigated the labyrinthine corridors of the embassy. The sound of approaching Bolian security forces echoed behind him. In a desperate bid to evade capture, Charles ducked into an unmarked room. He froze. Before him stood Princess Zephyr, alone and unguarded. Charles raised his weapon, expecting to face a cruel, arrogant alien. Instead, he saw curiosity in her eyes and something else. Sympathy? Before either could speak, alarms blared throughout the embassy. Bolian forces were closing in. In that moment, Charles made a decision that would alter the course of human history. He took Princess Zephyr hostage. As they fled through the chaos of the embassy, Charles's mind raced. He had come here seeking intelligence, but he had captured something far more valuable. With the Bolian heir in his custody, the resistance now held a powerful bargaining chip against the Empire. Yet as they ran, something unexpected happened. Charles found himself drawn to Zephyr's courage and intelligence. She was nothing like the monsters he had imagined. For her part, Zephyr saw in Charles the spirit and determination that had allowed humanity to survive against impossible odds. As they escaped into the night, neither realized that their chance encounter would spark a romance to rival that of Romeo and Juliet, a love that would challenge the very foundations of the interstellar order and perhaps offer hope for both their species. The night air was thick with tension as Charles and Zephyr fled through the labyrinthine streets of New Atlanta. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing fainter as they put more distance between themselves and the Bolian embassy. Charles's mind raced, processing the unexpected turn of events that had led to him escaping with the alien princess in tow. "Now we need to get off the main streets," Charles whispered, guiding Zephyr down a narrow alley choked with debris. The princess stumbled, her ornate robes ill-suited for their frantic escape. Without hesitation, Charles caught her arm, steadying her. "Thank you," Zephyr said, her voice tinged with a mix of fear and exhilaration. "Where are we going?" "There's an old human settlement on the outskirts of the city," Charles explained, his eyes constantly scanning for threats. "We can lay low there until I can contact my team." As they moved through the shadows of once proud skyscrapers, Charles couldn't shake the feeling that he was missing something crucial. It wasn't until they paused to catch their breath in the hollowed-out shell of an old convenience store that he noticed the faint glow emanating from Zephyr's pocket. "What's that?" he asked, gesturing to the light. Zephyr's eyes widened as she reached into her pocket and withdrew a small crystalline object. "It's a data crystal," she explained. "I was meant to deliver it to the embassy staff. It contains—" "Oh no." "What?" Charles pressed, his heart rate quickening. "Detailed plans of Boolean military operations on Earth," Zephyr whispered, her voice a mix of awe and dread. Charles stared at the crystal, his knees going weak with the implications. This tiny object could be the key to turning the tide of the resistance. He carefully took it from Zephyr, tucking it securely into a hidden pocket in his stealth suit. As dawn broke, they reached the abandoned settlement. Rows of dilapidated houses stood as silent sentinels, a testament to humanity's fall. Charles led Zephyr to a partially collapsed building that still offered some shelter. "Wait here," he instructed, pulling out a battered communications device. "I need to contact my second-in-command." Charles moved to a corner of the room, inputting a series of complex codes into the device. After a moment, a gruff voice crackled through the speaker. "Morgan, is that you?" "Marcus," Charles replied, relief evident in his voice. "We need extraction. I've got high-value assets, both information and a guest." "Understood," Marcus replied. "But we've got a problem. Boolean chatter is off the charts. They're looking for you, and they're led by—" The transmission cut off abruptly, replaced by a burst of static. Charles cursed under his breath, turning to Zephyr. "We've been compromised. We need to move." No sooner had the words left his mouth than the distant whine of Boolean search vehicles reached their ears. Charles peered out a broken window, his heart sinking as he saw the unmistakable silhouette of General Kraz's command ship descending from the clouds. "They've brought in Kraz," Charles muttered, his mind racing to formulate a plan. "General Kraz?" Zephyr's voice quavered. "He's ruthless, even by Boolean standards. We don't stand a chance against his forces." Charles turned to her, a determined glint in his eye. "We're not beat yet. This was your people's territory, but it was our home first. We know these ruins better than any Boolean ever could." Over the next few hours, Charles and Zephyr played a deadly game of cat and mouse with the Boolean search parties. They scavenged for supplies in abandoned homes, narrowly avoiding patrols by ducking into hidden crawl spaces and long-forgotten storm cellars. During a lull in the search, as they huddled in the basement of a collapsed school, Zephyr turned to Charles. "I never understood," she said softly. "The resilience of humans, your ability to adapt and survive despite the challenges. It's admirable." Charles studied her face, seeing genuine curiosity and something that looked almost like remorse. "Why did you come to Earth, Zephyr? What was your mission really about?" The princess was quiet for a long moment. "I was naive," she finally said. "I thought I could broker a peace, find a way to end the suffering. But now I see the truth of what my people have done here. The oppression, the destruction. It's unconscionable." Before Charles could respond, the ground beneath them shuddered. Dust rained down from the ceiling as the thunderous sound of Boolean energy weapons filled the air. "They're getting closer," Charles growled. "We need to find better cover." They emerged from the basement into chaos. Boolean troops were systematically destroying buildings, leaving no potential hiding place unchecked. In the distance, Charles could see General Kraz's command ship hovering ominously. "This way," Charles said, pulling Zephyr towards a nondescript hill overgrown with vegetation. As they ran, the ground beneath their feet suddenly gave way, sending them tumbling into darkness. They landed hard on a smooth metal floor. As Charles activated the light on his stealth suit, his jaw dropped. They were in a vast underground chamber filled with rows of sleek, advanced weaponry. "What is this place?" Zephyr asked, her eyes wide with wonder. "A hidden bunker," Charles breathed, "part of Earth's old defense network. We thought all of these were destroyed in the invasion." As they explored the bunker, Charles's communicator crackled to life. "Morgan, do you copy?" Marcus's voice came through, tinged with urgency. "I'm here, Marcus. What's your status?" "We're en route to your position, using salvaged Boolean stealth tech. ETA 10 minutes. But we've got company. Kraz's forces are converging on your location." Charles looked at the arsenal around him, then at Zephyr. In that moment, he saw not an alien princess, but a potential ally. "Zephyr, I need to know, are you with us?" The princess met his gaze, her decision clear in her eyes. "Yes," she said firmly. "I can help you outmaneuver Kraz's tactics. Let's show them what happens when they underestimate humanity." As Marcus and his team arrived, the sounds of battle erupted above. Charles armed himself with the bunker's advanced weapons, their familiar weight a comfort in his hands. He turned to his team, Zephyr at his side. "Let's remind the Bolians whose planet they're on," he said, leading the charge up to the surface. The battle that ensued was like nothing Charles had ever experienced. The human resistance fighters, armed with their rediscovered weapons, fought with a ferocity that caught the Bolian forces off guard. Zephyr's insights proved invaluable, allowing them to anticipate and counter Kraz's strategies. But as the fight raged on, a new threat emerged. Charles's communicator crackled with an urgent message. Bolian reinforcements were inbound, including orbital support capable of annihilating their position. Charles looked at the bunker entrance, then back at the battle raging around him. He knew what he had to do, even if it meant crossing a line from which there was no return. "Marcus," he called out over the din of battle, "get everyone back to the bunker. We're activating the missile defense system." As his team fell back, providing covering fire, Charles raced back into the bunker. He found the ancient missile control system, its displays flickering to life under his touch. "Charles," Zephyr said, her voice filled with concern, "if you do this, it will escalate the conflict beyond anything we've seen before." Charles met her gaze, the weight of his decision evident in his eyes. "I know," he said softly, "but if we don't, there won't be any humans left to fight." With Bolian forces closing in and orbital strikes imminent, Charles began the launch sequence. The bunker trembled as long dormant missile silos opened, ready to fire upon the incoming Bolian ships. As the countdown began, Charles looked at Zephyr, then at his battered but determined team. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The future of Earth, of humanity, and of the fragile connection between a human rebel and an alien princess hung in the balance as Charles's finger hovered over the launch button. The world seemed to hold its breath as the ancient machinery whirred to life. Suddenly, the ground shook violently as missiles erupted from hidden silos, streaking into the sky with trails of fire. Charles and Zephyr rushed to the bunker's view screen, watching in awe as the missiles found their targets. Bolian ships exploded in brilliant flashes of light, raining debris onto the battlefield below. General Kraz's command ship barely managed to escape, limping away with a trail of smoke. "We did it," Charles breathed, scarcely believing their success. Zephyr placed a hand on his shoulder, her eyes wide with a mix of relief and concern. "This changes everything," she said softly. As the dust settled, Charles and his team worked tirelessly to secure their newfound base. They scavenged Bolian technology from the wreckage, integrating it with the human weaponry they'd discovered. Zephyr's knowledge proved invaluable, helping them modify their defenses against Bolian detection methods. Days turned into weeks as they fortified their position. Charles found himself spending more time with Zephyr, their initial hostility fading into something deeper. One night, as they pored over Bolian schematics, their hands brushed. Charles looked up, meeting Zephyr's gaze. For a moment, the war seemed to fade away. Their moment was interrupted by Marcus bursting into the room. "Charles, we've got a problem," he said, his face grim. "The Bolians are retaliating. They're destroying human settlements, looking for us." Charles felt the weight of responsibility settle heavily on his shoulders. He turned to the view screen, watching as satellite imagery showed the systematic destruction of human outposts. "We need to do something," he said, his voice tight with anger. Zephyr stepped forward, her face set with tenacity. "I may have a solution," she said. "There's a network of pre-invasion tunnels connecting major cities. We could use them to move undetected, expand our operations." Charles nodded, a plan already forming in his mind. "Marcus, organize reconnaissance teams. We need to map out these tunnels and gather intel on Bolian movements." As Marcus left to carry out his orders, Charles turned to Zephyr. "You're really with us on this, aren't you?" he asked softly. Zephyr met his gaze unflinchingly. "I've seen the truth of what my people have done here. I can't stand by and let it continue." Over the next few days, the Resistance launched a series of coordinated attacks on Bolian outposts. Using the tunnel network, they struck swiftly and disappeared before reinforcements could arrive. Charles led many of these missions himself, his heart pounding with exhilaration as they dealt blow after blow to the Bolian occupiers. During one such raid, they encountered an unexpected ally. As they infiltrated a Bolian research facility, they found a human woman frantically deleting files from a computer terminal. "Wait," she called out as Charles raised his weapon. "I'm Dr. Alara Mason. I've been working on something that could turn the tide of this war." Charles lowered his gun cautiously. "What are you talking about?" Dr. Mason's eyes gleamed with excitement. "A virus, one that could disable Bolian technology, but I need access to a central command center to deploy it." Charles exchanged a look with Zephyr, the possibilities racing through their minds. "We might be able to help with that," he said. Back at the bunker, Zephyr used her royal credentials to access Bolian military databases. Her face paled as she read through the files. "Charles," she called out, her voice shaking, "you need to see this." Charles leaned over her shoulder, his eyes widening as he read. The Bolian Emperor's true plans for Earth were laid bare, the complete eradication of humanity to make way for Bolian colonization. Zephyr stood, her face a mask of fury and grit. "I can't be part of this anymore," she declared. "I officially denounce my ties to the Bolian Empire." Her words sent shockwaves through the Resistance. Some, like Marcus, remained skeptical. "How do we know this isn't some kind of trick?" he demanded. Charles stepped between them. "I trust her," he said firmly, "and we're going to need her for what comes next." He outlined his plan, a daring infiltration of the Bolian Command Center in Chicago. They would deploy Dr. Mason's virus and broadcast Zephyr's denouncement to all Bolian forces on Earth. As they prepared for the mission, tension filled the air. The stakes had never been higher. Charles caught Zephyr alone in the armory, her hands shaking slightly as she checked her weapon. "Are you sure about this?" he asked gently. Zephyr looked up at him, her eyes filled with a mix of fear and grit. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life," she replied. Their moment was interrupted by an urgent message from one of their recon teams. Commander Vex and the Crimson Guard had arrived in Chicago, implementing a scorched earth policy in their search for the Resistance. Charles cursed under his breath. "We need to move now," he said. "Every minute we delay costs more lives." They split into two teams. Charles and Zephyr would lead the infiltration, while Marcus created a diversion to draw away the Crimson Guard. As they moved through the tunnel network toward Chicago, they encountered unexpected resistance from human collaborators working for the Bolians. "We can't afford to be slowed down," Charles growled as they engaged in yet another firefight. "Push through." Finally, they emerged from the tunnels into the ruins of Chicago. Before them loomed the heavily fortified Bolian Command Center, its defenses dripping with weaponry. Charles turned to his team, their faces illuminated by the glow of the Bolian force field. "This is it," he said, his voice steady despite the gravity of the moment. "Everything we've fought for comes down to this. Let's remind the Bolians whose planet they're on." With a nod to Zephyr, Charles signaled the attack. As they charged towards the command center, the sky lit up with weapons fire. The fate of Earth hung in the balance as human and alien fought side by side, united against a common enemy. The Bolian Command Center loomed before them, a fortress of alien technology and weaponry. Charles glanced at Zephyr, her face set with persistence. With a nod, they charged forward. The air crackled with energy as Bolian defenses came to life. Beams of searing light cut through the night, forcing the team to scatter. Charles dove behind a fallen concrete pillar, the heat of a near miss singeing his hair. "We need to get inside," he shouted over the din of battle. "Marcus, can you draw their fire?" Marcus grinned, hefting a salvaged Bolian plasma cannon. With pleasure, he said, unleashing a barrage of energy bolts at the command center's main turrets. As Marcus's team created a diversion, Charles and Zephyr led a smaller group towards a side entrance. Zephyr placed her hand on a scanner, her royal credentials still active. The door slid open with a hiss. "We're in," Charles breathed, his pulse racing. "Let's move." They crept through sterile corridors, the distant sounds of battle echoing through the facility. At an intersection, Charles made a quick decision. "We need to split up," he said. "Zephyr and I will head for the central control room. The rest of you, cause as much chaos as you can." As their teammates peeled off, Charles and Zephyr pressed on. They encountered pockets of resistance, Bolian security forces caught off guard by their presence. Charles moved with practiced efficiency, his marine training evident in every precise shot and fluid movement. Zephyr matched his intensity, her own combat skills honed by years of royal training. She moved with a grace that belied her deadly accuracy, her energy pistol finding its mark with unerring precision. Finally, they reached the central control room. Charles placed Dr. Mason's virus module on the main console, his fingers flying over the alien interface. "Cover me," he said to Zephyr. "This will take a few minutes to upload." Zephyr took up a defensive position, her eyes scanning for threats. The upload bar crawled forward agonizingly slowly. Suddenly, the doors burst open. Commander Vex strode in, flanked by a squad of Crimson Guard soldiers. "Well, well," he sneered, "the human rebel and the traitor princess." Charles spun, raising his weapon, but the Crimson Guard were faster. Energy bolts filled the air, forcing Charles and Zephyr to dive for cover. "Keep them busy," Charles shouted, turning back to the console. The virus was only halfway uploaded. Zephyr nodded, popping up from behind a control panel to return fire. Her shots found their mark, dropping 2 Crimson Guard soldiers, but more poured in, their relentless assault pushing Zephyr and Charles further into the room. As Charles worked feverishly to complete the upload, Zephyr noticed a secondary console. With a burst of inspiration, she lunged for it, dodging energy bolts. Her fingers danced across the controls, activating the facility's communication systems. "People of the Bolian Empire," she began, her voice ringing out across all frequencies. "I am Princess Zephyr, and I renounce my allegiance to the Emperor. The atrocities committed against Earth and its people must end. I call on all Bolians of conscience to lay down their arms and join the human resistance." Her words echoed through the command center and beyond, reaching every Bolian soldier and ship in Earth's orbit. In the corridors outside, confused murmurs broke out among the Bolian forces. Commander Vex roared with rage, charging toward Zephyr with his energy sword raised. Charles intercepted him, deflecting the blow with his own weapon. They engaged in a furious duel, energy blades clashing in a deadly dance. As they fought, the effects of Dr. Mason's virus began to manifest. Lights flickered, security barriers failed, and weapon systems went offline. Confusion spread through the Bolian ranks. Outside, Marcus and his team capitalized on the chaos. They discovered a Bolian weapons cache and turned it against the facility's external defenses. Explosions rocked the command center as Marcus's team systematically dismantled its fortifications. In the control room, the tide of battle shifted. A group of Bolian soldiers, moved by Zephyr's words, turned on the Crimson Guard. The resulting firefight allowed Charles to gain the upper hand against Commander Vex. With a well-timed strike, Charles disarmed Vex, sending the commander's energy sword clattering across the floor. Vex fell to his knees, defeated. "It's over, Vex," Charles said, his weapon trained on the Bolian commander. Zephyr joined him, her eyes hard. "Surrender and face justice for your crimes." As Vex was secured, Dr. Mason's voice crackled over Charles's communicator. "The virus is fully deployed," she reported. "Bolian systems worldwide are going dark." Charles allowed himself a moment of relief before turning to the captured Bolian command systems. "Let's see what secrets the Empire's been keeping," he said, diving into the intelligence files. What they discovered sent a chill through Charles and Zephyr. The Bolian Emperor had ordered the destruction of major human population centers in retaliation for the Resistance's actions. "We need to move fast," Charles said, his mind racing. "If we can take out their main fleet—" Zephyr nodded, already formulating a plan. "We have access to their ship locations and security codes. If we can capture a Bolian cruiser—" As they began to outline their daring plan, reports flooded in from around the globe. Human resistance cells, emboldened by the Bolian technology failure, launched coordinated attacks against weakened enemy positions. Charles looked out over the Chicago skyline, now dotted with the flames of battle. They had won a significant victory, but the war was not nearly finished. The true test lay ahead, taking the fight to the stars and facing the full might of the Bolian Empire. He turned to Zephyr, seeing the same mix of willpower and apprehension in her eyes. Together, they began to prepare for their most ambitious mission yet. The fate of two worlds hung in the balance, and failure was not an option. An option. The image of Earth, a blue marble suspended in the void, filled Charles's mind as he turned to address the assembled resistance fighters. "We've dealt the Bolians a significant blow, but our home isn't safe yet," he said, his voice carrying across the repurposed command center. "It's time to take the fight to their doorstep." Over the next few days, the Resistance transformed the Bolian facility into a hive of activity. Engineers and technicians worked around the clock to modify captured Bolian ships with Dr. Mason's virus. The sterile alien corridors buzzed with human grit as Resistance members prepared for the unprecedented mission ahead. Charles found Zephyr in one of the hangar bays, her brow furrowed as she studied a holographic display of a Bolian cruiser. "How's the training coming along?" he asked, stepping beside her. She flicked off the display with a sigh. "It's challenging. The Bolian systems are unintuitive, but we're making progress." As they discussed the intricacies of alien technology, Charles couldn't help but notice the new depth in Zephyr's eyes. The weight of her choices, betraying her people, fighting alongside humans, was evident in the set of her shoulders and the occasional distant look that crossed her face. Their conversation was interrupted by Marcus Hale, striding into the hangar with purpose. "We've got teams deploying to major cities," he reported. "New York, London, Tokyo. We're setting up defensive perimeters and evac plans in case the Bolians try anything drastic." Charles nodded, a grim satisfaction settling over him. They were as prepared as they could be. "Good work, Marcus. Keep me updated on—" A sudden commotion at the hangar entrance cut him off. Dr. Mason burst in, her face flushed with excitement. "We're receiving a transmission," she gasped, "from orbit. It's a Bolian science vessel requesting asylum." The control room crackled with tension as the transmission played. Captain Lyra's face filled the main screen, her eyes wide with urgency. "Please," she pleaded, "we seek refuge. The Emperor, he's gone mad. What he plans for Earth, for his own people, it's unthinkable." Charles exchanged a look with Zephyr, who nodded almost imperceptibly. "Dock your vessel with our station," he said to Lyra, "but be warned, any sign of betrayal, and we'll respond with force." Hours later, Charles sat across from Captain Lyra in a makeshift conference room. The Bolian scientist's tentacles twitched nervously as she spoke. "The Emperor plans to use a superweapon," she explained, her voice barely above a whisper. "It will render Earth uninhabitable. Many in the fleet oppose this, but we're powerless to stop him." Lyra's gaze darted between Charles and Zephyr. "I have schematics," she continued, producing a data crystal, "of the command ship, the Emperor's chambers, everything." As Charles reviewed the information, a plan began to form. He turned to Zephyr, seeing the same realization dawning in her eyes. "We split our forces," he said. "The main fleet draws their fire while a strike team—" "infiltrates the command ship," Zephyr finished, a fierce grin spreading across her face. The next week passed in a blur of preparation. Resistance fighters drilled in zero-gravity combat scenarios, while engineers worked feverishly to integrate Dr. Mason's virus into their stolen ship systems. Charles and Zephyr spent long hours poring over the command ship schematics, planning their approach. In rare moments of quiet, Charles found his thoughts drifting to Zephyr, her unwavering commitment to their cause, her quick mind and fierce heart. He couldn't deny the growing connection between them. But with the fate of Earth hanging in the balance, he pushed those feelings aside. There would be time for such things after the mission, if they survived. Finally, the day of launch arrived. The Resistance fleet, a motley assortment of modified Bolian ships and human vessels, assembled in low Earth orbit. Charles stood on the bridge of the lead ship, surveying the ragtag armada before him. "All ships report ready, sir," a young Resistance fighter announced from her console. Charles nodded, his heart made with persistence. "Then let's remind the Bolians whose galaxy they're in." The fleet accelerated, pushing out of Earth's orbit. For a moment, all was quiet. Then alarms blared across every ship. "Multiple contacts," the sensor operators shouted. "Bolian patrols closing fast." "Evasive maneuvers," Charles commanded. "All ships, prepare to engage." Space lit up with weapons fire as the two fleets collided. Human ingenuity clashed with Bolian technology in a spectacular display of lights and explosions. Charles barked orders, coordinating their attack with a mixture of traditional tactics and unpredictable maneuvers that kept the Bolians off balance. Amidst the chaos, Charles spotted an opening. "Zephyr, this is our chance," he said into his comm. "Form up the strike team. We're going in." Their ship broke away from the main battle, streaking towards the massive Bolian command vessel looming in the distance. As they approached, Zephyr's voice came over the comm. "I'm detecting a massive energy buildup," she reported, her tone grim. "The superweapon, they're charging it." Charles's hands tightened on the controls. "Then we don't have much time. All strike team members, prepare for boarding. This is our one shot to save Earth." The strike team's ship maneuvered through a hail of defensive fire, relying on their modified systems to slip past the command ship's shields. With a shudder, they latched onto the hull. Charles turned to his team, a mix of human resistance fighters and defected Bolian soldiers. "Remember your training," he said. "We have two objectives: neutralize the Emperor and disable that weapon. Failure is not an option." As the airlock hissed open, Charles caught Zephyr's eye. A moment of understanding passed between them. Whatever happened next, they were in this together. Then with a nod, they plunged into the heart of the enemy ship, the fate of two worlds resting on their shoulders. The corridors of the Bolian command ship thrummed with energy as Charles led his team deeper into its depths. Every step brought them closer to their objective, and to potential disaster if they were discovered. The knowledge that Earth's fate hung in the balance pushed them forward, their movements swift and purposeful. Rounding a corner, they encountered their first real resistance. A squad of Bolian guards, their tentacles wrapped around advanced energy weapons, opened fire without warning. Charles dove for cover, the heat of a near miss singeing his hair. "Return fire!" he shouted, his own weapon already blazing. The narrow corridor became a kill zone, filled with crisscrossing energy beams and the acrid smell of ozone. As the firefight intensified, Charles spotted an opportunity. "Zephyr!" he called out, "the maintenance hatch." Zephyr followed his gaze, nodding in understanding. While Charles and the others provided covering fire, she sprinted towards a small access panel. Her fingers, well practiced from their intensive training, danced across the alien controls. With a hiss, the hatch slid open. "Move," Charles ordered. The strike team scrambled into the maintenance shaft, Zephyr sealing it behind them just as another wave of Bolian reinforcements arrived. They crawled through the cramped space, the ship's vital systems pulsing around them. Charles consulted the schematics in his heads-up display. "We're approaching a junction," he whispered. "Zephyr, take your team and head for the reactor control room. We'll push on to the Emperor's chambers." Zephyr's eyes met his in the dim light. For a moment, Charles saw a flicker of something more than just comradeship, but now wasn't the time for such thoughts. With a nod, Zephyr led her team down a branching tunnel. Charles pushed forward, his remaining squad members close behind. They emerged from the maintenance shaft into a deserted corridor, its walls adorned with the intricate patterns of Boolean architecture. "Stay alert," Charles murmured. "The Emperor's chambers should be just ahead." As they approached the ornate doors of the Imperial suite, an eerie silence fell over the corridor. Charles's instincts screamed a warning. "Wait," he hissed, holding up a hand to halt his team. It was then that the Emperor's voice boomed through the ship's communication system, filled with maniacal glee. "Foolish humans," he crowed. "Did you think I would be so easily cornered? Your pathetic resistance ends now. Witness the power of the Boolean Empire." Charles's blood ran cold as he realized the trap they'd walked into. "Zephyr," he barked into his comm. "Abort your mission. Get to the weapon controls now." He turned to his team, their faces a mix of commitment and fear. "Change of plans," he said grimly. "We're heading for the bridge. Move." As they raced through the ship's winding corridors, Charles's mind whirled with possibilities. They needed to stop the superweapon, but the Emperor was still a threat. And somewhere in this labyrinth of a ship, Zephyr and her team were fighting their own battle. The ship shuddered, a deep vibration that Charles felt in his bones. The superweapon was powering up. Earth's time was running out. Pushing aside his fear, Charles led his team onward. They would find a way to stop this. They had to. The alternative was unthinkable. As they rounded another corner, they came face to face with a squad of elite Boolean guards, their weapons already raised. In that moment of frozen time before the firefight began, Charles made a silent promise. To Earth, to humanity, to Zephyr. They would prevail. They had to. The corridor erupted in a storm of energy blasts as human and Boolean clashed once more, the fate of two worlds hanging in the balance. The corridor erupted in a storm of energy blasts as human and Boolean clashed once more, the fate of two worlds hanging in the balance. Charles ducked behind a protruding bulkhead, feeling the heat of plasma bolts sizzling past his head. He glanced at his team, their faces set with dogged dedication as they returned fire. "We need to push through," Charles shouted over the din of battle. "The bridge is our only shot at stopping this." Private Rodriguez nodded, pulling a Boolean stun grenade from his belt. With practiced precision, he lobbed it into the midst of the enemy squad. The corridor filled with a blinding flash and high-pitched whine. Charles and his team surged forward, taking advantage of the momentary confusion. As they advanced deeper into the ship, the defenses grew more sophisticated. Automated turrets emerged from hidden panels, their targeting systems locking onto the human intruders. Energy shields flickered to life, blocking their path. "Cover me," Charles ordered, diving towards a nearby control panel. His fingers flew over the alien interface, mind racing as he recalled the schematics they'd studied. With a triumphant grunt, he rerouted power from the shields, causing them to flicker and die. Meanwhile, Corporal Chen had commandeered one of the fallen Boolean's weapons. She turned it on the automated turrets, the unfamiliar recoil nearly throwing her off balance. But her aim was true, and the defense systems exploded in showers of sparks. As they neared the bridge, Charles's comm crackled to life. Zephyr's voice came through, tense but controlled. "Charles, we've reached the super weapon control room, but we've got a situation." He pressed himself against a wall, motioning for his team to hold position. "What's happening?" "We're in a standoff with the engineers," Zephyr replied. "Some of them. I think they're starting to realize the Emperor's gone too far. I'm trying to talk them down, but—" Her words were cut off by the sound of weapons fire. Charles's heart clenched. "Zephyr, are you—" "I'm fine," she answered, her voice strained. "But we've got loyalists here. We'll handle it. You focus on the bridge." The connection cut out, leaving Charles with a mixture of relief and renewed urgency. He turned to his team, about to give the order to move out, when his comm chirped again. This time, it was Marcus Hale's voice that filled his ear. "Charles, we've got trouble planetside," Marcus reported, the sounds of battle audible in the background. "The Booleans are launching an all-out assault on our major cities. We're holding them off for now, but we can't keep this up forever. Charles closed his eyes for a moment, the weight of Earth's fate pressing down on him. Understood, Marcus. We're almost to the bridge. Hold on just a little longer. With renewed commitment, Charles led his team forward. They encountered increasingly desperate resistance as they neared their goal. Bolian soldiers threw themselves at the humans, using their bodies to block doorways and corridors. Finally, they reached the massive doors leading to the bridge. Charles nodded to his demolitions expert, who quickly planted charges along the seam. They took cover as the explosion rocked the ship, and then they were through. The bridge was a scene of controlled chaos. Bolian officers manned their stations, shouting orders and status reports, and there, at the center of it all, stood the Emperor. Charles's eyes widened as he took in the Bolian leader. The Emperor was massive, easily twice the size of a normal member of his species. Cybernetic enhancements gleamed along his tentacles and across his torso, pulsing with an eerie blue light. "So," the Emperor's voice boomed, somehow managing to sound both amused and enraged. "The human vermin have found their way to my doorstep." He raised an arm, a built-in weapon humming to life. Charles and his team scattered as energy bolts tore through the air, leaving scorch marks on the deck plating. The bridge erupted into close-quarters combat. Human resistance fighters grappled with Bolian guards, the two species' different physiologies leading to a brutal, chaotic melee. Charles found himself face to tentacle with the Emperor, dodging cybernetically enhanced strikes that left dents in the metal flooring. Amidst the chaos, a familiar voice cut through the ship's speakers. It was Dr. Lyra, the defected Bolian scientist. "Attention all Bolian forces," she announced, her voice tight with emotion. "I am transmitting proof of the Emperor's true plans. He intends to use Earth as a testing ground for weapons of unimaginable destruction. His madness will lead not only to humanity's downfall, but to our own." The effect was immediate. Several Bolian officers hesitated, their loyalty visibly wavering. Some even turned their weapons on their former comrades, adding to the confusion on the bridge. Charles used the distraction to his advantage, managing to land a solid hit on the Emperor's cybernetic arm. The weapon sputtered and died, but the Bolian leader merely laughed. "You think this changes anything?" he roared. "Earth will burn, and from its ashes, the Bolian Empire will rise to dominate the galaxy." Before Charles could respond, his comm crackled once more. It was Zephyr, her voice urgent. "Charles, we've disabled the primary firing mechanism, but there's a problem. The power core is destabilizing. If we don't contain it, this whole ship could go up, along with a good chunk of both fleets." Charles's mind raced, assessing their options as he continued to dodge the Emperor's attacks. A plan began to form, dangerous and desperate, but possibly their only chance. "Zephyr," he said, ducking under a vicious swipe from the Emperor's tentacle. "I need you to reroute that energy. Can you direct it through the ship's systems to the bridge?" There was a moment of silence, then understanding dawned in Zephyr's voice. "You want to overload his cybernetics? It's risky, but we'll make it work. Give us a few minutes." Charles turned his full attention back to the Emperor, who was advancing with murderous intent. "It's over," Charles declared, standing his ground. "Your fleet is in disarray. Your superweapon is disabled. Surrender now, and we can end this without further bloodshed." The Emperor's laugh was cold and cruel. "You understand nothing, human. This is merely a setback. Even now, my forces on Earth are laying waste to your cities, and I still have one final option." With lightning speed, the Emperor lunged towards a hidden panel on the wall. Charles's eyes widened as he realized what it was, an escape pod. He threw himself forward, colliding with the Bolian leader just as the panel slid open. They grappled on the floor, Charles using every ounce of strength to keep the Emperor from reaching the pod's launch controls. Alarms began to blare throughout the ship. The deck plates vibrated beneath them as power surged through the vessel's systems. Charles knew he just had to hold on for a few more seconds. Suddenly, the Emperor's cybernetic enhancements began to spark and smoke. The Bolian leader's eyes widened in shock and pain as his own technology turned against him. With a final, spectacular surge of energy, the Emperor collapsed, his systems overloaded and fried. Charles staggered to his feet, breathing heavily. Around him, the remaining Bolian soldiers lowered their weapons, the fight gone out of them. He made his way to the main communications panel, keying in the frequency for a ship-wide broadcast. "Attention all Bolian and human forces," he began, his voice carrying across the vastness of space to the fleets beyond and the embattled planet below. "The Emperor has been defeated. The superweapon is neutralized. I call for an immediate cessation of all hostilities." As the message went out, Charles leaned heavily against the console. They had won this battle, but he knew the war was nowhere near the end. The Bolian fleet was in disarray, Earth was still under attack, and the complex task of securing a lasting peace lay ahead. He looked up as Zephyr entered the bridge, her uniform scuffed and torn but her eyes shining with triumph. Their gazes met, a moment of shared victory and unspoken connection passing between them. "What now?" Zephyr asked, coming to stand beside him. Charles straightened up, surveying the chaotic bridge. "Now," he said, "we start putting the pieces back together." Together. Charles took a deep breath, surveying the chaotic bridge. "We need to stabilize the situation, both here and on Earth." Zephyr nodded, her eyes sharp with perseverance. "I'll start by addressing the Bolian fleet. We need to capitalize on the confusion in their ranks." As Zephyr moved to the communications array, Charles activated his comm link. "Marcus, what's the situation planet-side?" Marcus Hale's voice came through, strained but steady. "It's a mess down here, Charles. Bolian ground forces are in disarray, but we've still got pockets of heavy resistance. We're making progress, but it's slow going." "Understood. I'm going to coordinate with our orbital forces. We'll provide support where we can. Keep pushing forward." Charles turned his attention to the tactical display, assessing the scattered Bolian fleet. Some ships had already powered down their weapons, while others maintained aggressive postures. He began issuing rapid-fire orders to the human resistance ships, directing them to secure key positions and intercept any Bolian vessels attempting to flee or regroup. Across the bridge, Zephyr's voice rang out, addressing all Bolian forces. "This is Princess Zephyr of the Bolian royal family. The Emperor has fallen, his madness and cruelty exposed. I call upon all Bolian forces to stand down immediately. We have been deceived, led astray by a tyrant who cared nothing for our people or our honor. The humans are not our enemies. They have fought with valor to defend their home, just as we would. It is time to end this senseless conflict." Her words had an immediate impact. More Bolian ships powered down their weapons, signaling their surrender, but not all were swayed. A cluster of warships near Earth's southern hemisphere maintained attack formation, their weapons hot. "Charles," Zephyr called, her voice tense. "We've got a problem. Admiral Krax is rallying the hardliners. He's refusing to stand down." As if on cue, a new voice boomed through the ship's speakers. "This is Admiral Krax of the Bolian Imperial Fleet. The princess has been compromised, seduced by human lies. The Emperor's vision will not die with him. All loyal Bolian forces rally to me. We will crush this human resistance once and for all." Charles cursed under his breath. He had hoped for a clean victory, but it seemed the battle was a long way to go. "Zephyr, keep trying to reason with them. I'm going to contact Earth." He opened a secure channel to the Resistance headquarters. "Dr. Mason, are you there? We need your help." The scientist's voice came through, tinged with static. "I'm here, Charles. What do you need?" "We've neutralized the Emperor, but we've got a faction of hardliners threatening to bombard the planet. Can you adapt your virus to target their weapon systems?" There was a pause, filled only by the sound of rapid typing. "It's possible, but I'll need access to their current systems. The virus will need to be modified to bypass any updates they've made." Charles nodded, even though she couldn't see him. "I'll get you connected to the command ship's mainframe. Work fast, Doctor. We don't have much time." As Dr. Mason set to work, Charles received another incoming transmission. It was Marcus again, his voice urgent. Charles, we've identified the location of the Bolian's primary planetary defense grid. If we can take it out, we can leave those ships up there vulnerable to attack from the ground. Charles weighed the options quickly. It was a risky move, but it could give them the edge they needed. Do it, Marcus, but be careful. We can't afford to lose you or your team. The next hours were a blur of activity. Charles coordinated the space battle, directing human ships to intercept Krax's forces while avoiding casualties where possible. Zephyr continued her diplomatic efforts, swaying more Bolian commanders to their side. On Earth, Marcus led his team on a daring assault against the planetary defense grid, facing fierce resistance from entrenched Bolian forces. Just as it seemed they might be gaining the upper hand, a new alert blared through the command ship. A massive Bolian vessel had just emerged from faster-than-light travel near Earth's moon. "Zephyr," Charles called, tension evident in his voice. "Are you seeing this? Can you identify that ship?" Zephyr's eyes widened as she studied the readout. It's the Senate ship, the civilian leadership of the Empire. What are they doing here?" A new transmission came through, this one from the Senate ship itself. "This is High Senator Vex of the Bolian Empire. We have received word of the Emperor's defeat and the Princess's call for peace. We request an immediate ceasefire and propose opening negotiations." Charles exchanged a look with Zephyr. This could be the breakthrough they needed. He opened a channel to all forces, human and Bolian alike. "This is Charles Chen of the Human Resistance. We accept the call for a ceasefire and welcome the opportunity for negotiation. I propose a meeting aboard the Senate ship, with representatives from all parties present." As arrangements were made for the peace talks, Charles received word from Marcus. His team had successfully disabled the planetary defense grid, shifting the balance of power in Earth's orbit. It was a crucial advantage, one that Charles intended to leverage in the upcoming negotiations. Hours later, Charles found himself aboard the Senate ship, facing a diverse group of Bolian leaders and human resistance representatives. The atmosphere was tense, filled with centuries of mistrust and the fresh wounds of recent conflict. High Senator Vex opened the proceedings, his voice grave. "We stand at a crossroads. The actions of our former emperor have brought shame upon the Bolian people. We must find a way forward that respects the rights of humanity while preserving the honor and integrity of our own civilization." Charles stepped forward, keenly aware of the weight of this moment. "Senators, representatives of the Bolian people, I come before you not as a conqueror, but as a voice for cooperation. Humanity has proven its right to self-dedication. We seek not domination, but peaceful coexistence." He presented the evidence of the Emperor's atrocities, laying bare the full extent of the tyrant's madness. The Bolian leaders recoiled in shock and disgust at the revelations. As discussions progressed, Charles pressed their advantage. "We call for the complete withdrawal of Bolian forces from Earth and recognition of human independence. In return, we offer a hand of friendship and the promise of future collaboration between our peoples." The negotiations were delicate, with centuries of Bolian supremacy beliefs clashing against the undeniable resilience of humanity. Zephyr played a crucial role, bridging the gap between the two species and offering insights into both perspectives. Just as it seemed they might be reaching a tentative agreement, alarms blared throughout the ship. Admiral Krax's forces, rejecting the peace process, had launched an attack on the Senate vessel. Chaos erupted in the negotiation chamber. Charles grabbed Zephyr's arm, pulling her towards cover as the ship shuddered under the impact of weapons fire. "We need to get to the bridge," he shouted over the din of panicked voices and blaring alarms. "If we can take control of the ship's defenses, we might have a chance." As they raced through the corridors of the Senate ship, Charles's mind whirled with the enormity of the situation. The fate of two species now hung in the balance, with the lives of key leaders from both sides at risk. He knew that the decisions made in the next few moments would shape the course of human-Bolian relations for generations to come. Reaching the bridge, Charles and Zephyr found it in disarray. Bolian crew members struggled to mount a defense against Krax's unexpected assault. Charles strode to the main tactical display, quickly assessing the situation. "Zephyr, can you get through to any of our ships?" he asked, fingers flying over the controls as he worked to bring the Senate ship's shields to full power. Zephyr nodded, already moving to the communications array. I'll try to coordinate a response, but Charles, if we fight back too aggressively, we risk undoing all the progress we've made in the peace talks. Charles gritted his teeth, knowing she was right. They needed a way to neutralize Krax's forces without escalating the conflict further. As another blast rocked the ship, a plan began to form in his mind. Get me a direct line to Krax's flagship, he ordered, his voice steady despite the chaos around him. It's time to end this one way or another. Or another? Charles said, his voice filled with commitment. As he prepared to open communications with Krax's flagship, the ship shuddered under another barrage of weapons fire. Charles stumbled, catching himself on the edge of the console. He looked up to see Zephyr already in motion, her fingers flying over the controls. I've got an idea, she said, her eyes never leaving the display. We need to buy some time. I'm going to broadcast a message to all Bolian ships, including Krax's forces. Charles nodded, trusting her judgment. He turned his attention to the tactical display, assessing their options. We need to get our ships in defensive formation around the Senate vessel, he said, opening a channel to the Resistance fleet. All ships, this is Charles Chen, form a protective barrier around the Senate ship. Priority is defense, not offense. As the Resistance fleet moved into position, Zephyr's voice rang out across all frequencies. This is Princess Zephyr of the Bolian royal family. To all Bolian forces, I implore you to stand down. Admiral Krax's actions threaten not only the peace process, but the very future of our civilization. We stand on the brink of a new era, one of cooperation and mutual respect with humanity. Do not let the misguided actions of a few destroy this opportunity. Her words seemed to have an effect. Several Bolian ships broke off their attack, powering down their weapons. But Krax's flagship and its closest allies pressed on, their barrage intensifying. Charles's comm link crackled to life. It was Marcus Hale. Charles, we've got control of Earth's remaining orbital defenses. We're redirecting them to support your position now. Excellent work, Marcus, Charles replied, a glimmer of hope in his voice. Coordinate with our fleet. We need to divide Krax's attention. As Earth's defenses joined the fray, Krax's fleet found itself caught between multiple targets. The space around the Senate ship became a chaotic dance of energy weapons and evasive maneuvers. Charles turned to Zephyr. We need to get to the control room. If we can activate the Senate ship's full defensive capabilities, we might be able to turn the tide. Zephyr nodded, and together they raced through the corridors of the massive vessel. As they ran, Charles contacted Dr. Mason on Earth. Doctor, we need a way to neutralize Krax's ships without destroying them. Any ideas? I might have something, Dr. Mason replied, her voice strained with concentration. We've been working on adapting the virus to target their weapon system specifically, but we'd need direct access to their command ship to upload it. Charles's mind raced as they reached the control room. Keep working on it, Doctor. We'll find a way to deliver it. The control room was a hive of activity, with Bolian crew members struggling to manage the ship's systems under the constant assault. Charles and Zephyr moved to the central console, their hands moving in tandem as they worked to bring the ship's advanced defenses online. There! Zephyr exclaimed as a shimmering energy field enveloped the Senate ship. The impacts from Krax's weapons diminished, giving them a moment to breathe. Charles wasted no time. He opened a channel to the Resistance fleet. This is Charles Chen. I need volunteers for a high-risk mission. We're going to board Krax's flagship and upload a virus to their systems. As he coordinated with the volunteers, Zephyr continued her efforts to sway the Bolian forces. Her impassioned pleas, combined with the obvious military advantage of the human-Bolian alliance, began to have a greater effect. More ships broke away from Krax's fleet, some even turning to join the defense of the Senate vessel. Within minutes, Charles had assembled a small strike team. They gathered in the airlock, preparing for a perilous spacewalk through the battlefield. Charles checked his suit one last time, then turned to Zephyr. I have to go, he said, his voice muffled by his helmet. Keep the Senate ship safe. If we succeed, this will all be over soon. Zephyr gripped his arm, her eyes meeting his through the visor. "Be careful, Charles. Come back to me." With a nod, Charles led his team out into the void. They navigated through a hail of debris and weapons fire, using maneuvering packs to propel themselves toward Krax's flagship. The battle raged around them, energy beams and explosions illuminating the darkness of space. As they approached Krax's ship, Charles spotted a maintenance hatch. "There's our way in," he said over the comm. "Prepare for breach." They attached themselves to the hull, working quickly to override the hatch's security. As it slid open, Charles led the way inside, his heart pounding with adrenaline. The team moved swiftly through the ship's corridors, encountering minimal resistance. Most of the crew was focused on the battle outside. They reached a computer terminal, and Charles uploaded the virus Dr. Mason had prepared. "It's done," he reported back to the Senate ship. "Now we just need to—" An alarm blared through the ship, cutting him off. They had been detected. "Change of plans," Charles said to his team. "We're heading for the bridge. It's time to end this." They fought their way through the ship, using their element of surprise to overcome the Bolian defenders. As they reached the bridge, Charles found himself face to face with Admiral Krax. The Bolian admiral sneered. "So the human comes to face me himself. Do you think you can defeat me, little mammal?" Charles removed his helmet, meeting Krax's gaze. "This doesn't have to end in more bloodshed, Admiral. Surrender, and we can still find a peaceful resolution." Krax laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "Peace? With your inferior species? Never." He lunged at Charles, his massive form a blur of motion. Charles ducked under the attack, his marine training kicking in as he countered with a swift strike to Krax's midsection. The two engaged in a brutal hand-to-hand fight, Charles's agility and skill matching Krax's superior strength. They traded blows, each seeking an advantage over the other. As they fought, Charles could see the battle outside through the bridge's view screen. The virus was taking effect, Krax's fleet losing power and coordination. The tide was turning. With a final burst of energy, Charles swept Krax's legs out from under him, sending the massive Bolian crashing to the deck. In an instant, Charles was on him, his fist raised for a finishing blow. But he hesitated, seeing the fear and desperation in Krax's eyes. In that moment, Charles made a decision that would shape the future of human-Bolian relations. He lowered his fist. "It's over, Admiral," Charles said, his voice firm but not unkind. "Your fleet is neutralized. The Senate has called for peace. Stand down, and let's end this conflict before more lives are lost." Krax stared up at him, confusion replacing the hatred in his eyes. You're sparing me? Why?" Charles stood, offering his hand to the fallen admiral. "Because that's what humans do. We believe in second chances, in the possibility of change. It's time for a new chapter in our shared history, Admiral. Will you help us write it?" As Krax considered Charles's words, the bridge erupted in a flurry of activity. Bolian officers, seeing their leader defeated, began powering down weapon systems and opening communications with the Senate ship. Charles opened a channel to Zephyr. "It's done," he said, relief evident in his voice. "Krax's fleet is standing down. I think we've won." Zephyr's voice came through, filled with emotion. "Charles, you did it. The Senate is already drafting terms for a full withdrawal from Earth. They're talking about a permanent alliance between our people." As the reality of their victory sank in, Charles looked out at the Earth below, the blue and green planet that had endured so much. The real work, he knew, was just beginning. But as he stood there, surrounded by former enemies now turned allies, he felt a surge of hope for the future. The next days were a whirlwind of activity. Charles and Zephyr worked tirelessly, overseeing the peaceful withdrawal of Bolian forces from Earth and laying the groundwork for the new human-Bolian alliance. Dr. Mason's virus, originally designed as a weapon, was being adapted into a revolutionary system for cross-species technological integration. As Charles stood in the newly constructed joint human-Bolian space station, watching representatives from both civilizations shake hands, he felt a presence beside him. He turned to see Zephyr, her eyes shining with the same mix of exhaustion and excitement he felt. "Can you believe it?" she asked, gesturing to the scene before them. "A few weeks ago, we were enemies, and now—" Charles took her hand, feeling the warmth of her skin against his. "And now we're building a future together, both our peoples and us." Zephyr's grip tightened on his hand. "Us," she repeated, a smile playing on her lips. "I like the sound of that." As they stood there, watching the birth of a new era of cooperation, Charles knew that challenges lay ahead. But with Zephyr by his side and the combined strength of their two civilizations, he was ready to face whatever the future might bring.
You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.